Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Correllian tradition and of Gaia Thrift, which is where I am at this moment. And today is Roundup Friday when I'll be talking about various stories that have caught my attention. Uh, this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. As you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments on any platform you're seeing it on, and they will show up here in my chat room. And I have a few things to talk about today. One of them I talked a little bit about yesterday, and I don't have all of the details of it right in front of me, but I have the gist of it. And this was oh, and hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. This was a study out of Sweden. I believe it was Sweden. No, it was Switzerland. I beg your pardon. Talking about the idea that people are accustomed to dealing with enemies, for want of a better way to put it, and that when they don't have that, they're not quite sure what to do. And this was particularly aimed at the United States, which, if you look at our history, certainly seems to be fairly accurate. It seems like there's always something we're campaigning against. But if you look at history in general, I think we see this quite a lot. And it raises some interesting questions. And one of the questions it raises is it simply our nature that we have to be fighting something to maintain our focus? Part of this idea is that if a person or an organization or a culture overcomes all of its immediate challenges, that it becomes kind of lost. And the suggestion being made by this particular researcher is that is a problem the United States is facing, that after the end of the Cold War, we found it hard to refocus ourselves, that focusing on prosperity and peace and wellness really didn't work. And you see this a number of times historically, that when a culture reaches a place where it can just be, it is dominant on its field, it has everything where you would think they want it, they kind of fall apart. And I've seen this with people too. An argument could even be made for myself that I was more effective as long as I had challenges to deal with versus when I was dealing with fewer of them. And I think this is true for a lot of people I've seen, and it raises to me the question, is it part of our nature? And if we look at nature, do we see this? And I think I have to say yes. If we look at the vast majority of creatures in nature, they all have predators, they all have challenges, they all have things they're trying to survive against, and only a very few of them don't. Or at least among the life forms closest to us. And perhaps we're wired this way, that we need to have challenges to rise to our highest selves. And if this is an assumption that we can safely make, a number of our other assumptions need to be questioned. I've talked before about the idea that, peace is not really our natural state. It's something that we work for, but it's not a natural state for humanity. And, prosperity perhaps isn't either. That we're perhaps intended and wired to be constantly fighting to move forward. And if this is the case, how do we deal with that when we have, in fact, surmounted our challenges, when we have reached our plateau and need to keep going forward? If nothing is challenging us or chasing us or threatening us, do we just need to make up a new threat? Um, Part of the argument of this report was that that's kind of what's happening in the United States, that lacking actual threats, we're making them up in order to keep fighting. But I think if we look at a number of historical cultures, we see the same thing, that when we're not in a state of fighting for our existence, it becomes a lot harder for us to simply be. Now, part of, I think, the answer to this is what I always talk about, shadow work. Um, but this is something I think we all need to think about a little bit. I certainly need to think about it. How do we go forward when we're not challenged on all sides? Obviously, part of the answer is to challenge ourselves. And I think if we look back, historically, we can see times when that really helped individuals or society. I would argue that the space race was, in some ways, a red herring, but in otherwise, technologically, a huge step forward for the United States. Even though, as a rivalry, it was a relatively minor thing, but in terms of its results, it produced some spectacular ones. So I think that we can challenge ourselves without a need for exterior enemies, but I don't know that it's the easiest thing for most people. And my question is this karmic? Is this a karmic attachment for our entire species, for nature as a whole, perhaps? And if that is the case, what do we do with it? Do we simply adapt to it? Do we find ways to counter it and move beyond it? But I think it is something we cannot afford to not consider and deal with. It is a minor little story, and yet in some ways a very, very important one. So that's my first story for today, for our weekly roundup of stories. And, I have to say, looking back at my own life, I often talk about how for a period of about 20 years, 17 years specifically, we had a witch war every single year. Constant fighting that we weren't particularly looking for, but constantly getting. And it was one of the most exciting times of my life. And I have to pay attention to that and ask myself, what does that mean? What does that mean? Not necessarily for me, because I'm now an older man. And I'm at a point in life where my answer is to challenge myself, but what does it mean for other people? What does it mean for people in general, if this is the case? And how can we help people to deal with this? So, again, that's my first story for today. My second story, in some ways, ties into it. This morning I published, I shared a number of stories and published several memories on my Facebook page, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those. And one of the stories was the Wild Hunt did a story on the telethon from last weekend. Beautiful story, lovely story. And I thought that was a very good thing. And this, in some ways, talks to this same issue of how we move forward without conflict. Because now I've noticed over the years a lot of things in our media, and I'm not even going to focus on any particular situation, but very often is very contentious. The comments are often, as they are in general online, less than uplifting. And it seems sometimes like that sort of controversy carries things forward. And I noticed this perhaps a little too late on Magic TV. One of my vlogs that aired recently in my best of vlogs, which I air at like 5 in the morning now, But one of them was called Margie and the 41 Dislikes, if I remember correctly. And it was about the fact that back in the day, one of our viewers noticed that every single video that we did had exactly 41 dislikes day after day. Because obviously someone was going in and doing this as a campaign. And part of my reaction to that was to minimize controversy and fighting in our comments. I don't know that that was wise. And I stopped that policy some time ago, but we don't seem to get it now. But, I question whether those more contentious subjects and those more contentious commentary actually drive our various forms of media forward. And also that comes with the question, what does that say about us? And is that a tool we really wish to subscribe to? I've often talked about how I know I get more views if I talk about oogie boogie subjects. If I want to talk about demonic possession, I'd get far more views. If I wanted to talk about haunted dolls, I'd get far more views. And hello to Steve in the chat room. It's good to see you. If instead of talking about Corellianism and Wicca, I wanted to talk about demonology and Goetia, I'd get far more views, particularly if I did it in a sensational manner. Historically, I've chosen not to pursue those views. But I'm aware of where the views lie. And I've often said one of the reasons I did not get a higher viewership is I talked about serious matters. And hello to Lepus Felix in the chat room. And Lepus says people love drama. Yes, they do. And for me, this is something to think about. And, maybe I should do some more dramatic subjects without stopping my serious ones and see what happens. I recently had a lovely late night conversation with my great niece and her boyfriend, who had spent the day at a haunted house. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. And I know Renee is feeling a little under the weather. I hope you feel better soon. And we hope that you'll come down and see us in Danville sometime soon. But my niece and her boyfriend were thrilled with how greatly they had scared people during the day. Apparently, 2 people insisted they had peed themselves during the haunted house. And they were thrilled that they had done this. But it raises the question, why, as humans, do we do that? And to some extent, this answers that question. That we need that feeling that we're competing against something, that we live in a more fearsome world. And we find it hard to cope without it. Even when we know it's a fantasy, because not one person walked into that haunted house not knowing what to expect, except maybe some very young people. But everyone knew what a haunted house was. They knew that there would be ordinary people trying to scare them throughout this haunted house. And so, you have to ask yourself, A, why were you scared? Because you know what it is. And B, why do you seek that? But we do, year after year, century after century, if we look back at it. Now, Lepus says, what if you're scarier than them? Well, I've kind of done that once or twice. But it's a question. One of my favorite sayings is, as a witch, I'm not superstitious. I'm what people are superstitious of. But it is a fascinating thing to suddenly stop and think about. I have noticed how these things draw viewership and how they draw reaction, but I've never thought of them quite this way before. So hopefully you'll think about it also, and maybe you'll have some realization. Now, as I was saying, Wild Hunt covered the telethon. They did a beautiful job. Thank you, Wild Hunt. And thank you, Reverend Mary Hawk, for leading that effort. It was a great effort. Another story that I had in my memories today was the Halloween hamsters. And if you've looked at my Facebook page today, maybe you saw the Halloween hamsters. The Halloween hamsters were a little section that we did 18 years ago when we were about children, um, only just entering into middle age. Mary says, I'm honored to be able to do it. We are so happy that this came out so well. And again, thank you, Mary. Thank you, everyone who was involved in that telethon. I always enjoy watching the Halloween hamsters. Um, and Lepus says, I think if you go half and half with a serious topic but a light bit of drama to make it more interesting, that's a very good thought. I have to think about that. The Halloween hamsters were three little animated hamsters. They were a toy that was very popular at the time. We put them in front of a little haunted house. They danced. They were dancing hamsters. If you remember 20 years ago, dancing hamsters were a big thing online and in the toy world. And we played a sped up version of Black Magic Woman behind. And it was a cute little piece. We used to do more of that sort of thing, and I'm wondering if we should do more of it again. It's the exact opposite of what I was just talking about. I was just talking about the heavier Oogie Boogie subject, but going in for some of those lighter-hearted subjects might be a good thing for us to be looking at again too. So I'm curious about people's opinion on that. Would you like to see more humorous material? Although I have more to say about that in my next little story coming up, because getting humorous material, we've tried it many times over the years, but it's been very hard to find people to help with it. Easy to find people who say they'll help, and I have not always been. I used to have the reputation of having no sense of humor. That's not really true. But I did have that reputation. But it is something that would be so much easier with more involvement. So I'd like to say to you, if you were interested in being involved in our telecasting, contact us. We could really use more hands with this. And that brings me to my next story, which looking at the time is probably going to be the last one. But one of my memories today was about the Chancellor's Prayer Shrine. And I think that memory was from 9 years ago. And this is a project that we did. And Steve says, I find great interest in all of your presentations. Thank you, Steve. I used to do the Chancellor's Prayer Shrine, which was a healing shrine for the most part. Occasionally it was general prayers, but usually it was a healing for people. And for a period of several years, I did it every single day. Eventually, this became too much as other things in life simply made it impractical. But later I brought it back as a weekly thing. And looking at this, I'm wondering if I should not bring it back again as something I might do here at Gaia Thrift. Not during business hours, obviously, but perhaps in evenings and have it be open to people who might like to join. The thought occurred to me that this would be an interesting thing to start doing again. And I'm thinking I am going to give that a try. But what surprised me about this is I asked people if they'd like to see that. And the very first response I got was the last response I was expecting. And that came from the Reverend Sir Mike Nelson, who says, and I'm not quoting, but something to the effect of, I would love to see this. What can I do to help you? And that was not the answer I was expecting, but I was very happy to get it. Because what caused me to stop doing this was not enough help with a daily presentation. Now, with something like Midday with Rev Don, I could always use more guests, but as far as filming it, there's no help needed. I don't really do any editing to it. It's a live broadcast. Although I am thinking I should start doing interviews and bringing on guests of different kinds to broaden my subject matter, or maybe do it as a separate program. I'm thinking of that too. There are lots of little thoughts going on. But I was very, very impressed that the first response was one of offering help. So thank you, Sir Mike. Now, Sir Mike is in Canada. I'm not entirely sure what he could do to help with a Chancellor's Prayer Shrine, but I'm going to think about that because I find that a very hopeful and inspiring response. I was also very pleased to see that he offered this specifically as a paladin, as something he could do for community service, which I thought was also very positive. So we'll see if I start the Chancellor's Prayer Shrine again. I'm not sure I could do it in the same way because it was always a burning. And I chose to do it as a burning because burnings are very dramatic. When you see that fire rush up for just those few seconds. Years ago, I had a Filipino client. And there was a time when I had done a house cleansing for them, and they treated me to dinner, where I learned that Filipino cooking is one of the best cuisines I've ever had. Wonderful food. But my client talked about New Year's because it happened to be right around New Year's, and how this was so different for them in the United States, because in the Philippines, apparently, at least where my client was from, you have 24 hours of raucous fireworks and celebration. There are so many fireworks, according to them, that you can feel the vibrations, and you literally physically feel the changing of the year. And I thought this was a very insightful comment on how something like that can change your perception, and how he had trouble with the lack of physical vibration and physical stimulation during our United States New Year. But this is part of what I've always liked about burning spells. When that fire rushes up, you feel the sense of your manifestation coming into being, that your prayer is taking its effect because there's something physical happening. And a lot of spell work is based on concepts like that, effects like that. However, the increasing prevalence of fire alarms makes burning spells much less practical. So I'm going to have to see if I could do that here, because the last thing I want to do is be setting off fire alarms. And if I can't do that here, what else could I do that might be equally attention getting for one's higher self? So I have to think about that. But to me, these were some of the better stories I have found. And of course, there have been many other stories this week, but most of them I've already been talking about. They're either about efforts of hurricane relief, which I've spoken of many times this week, or they're political things that I don't necessarily want to touch on at this time. But these things I thought were very relevant and tie into many of my normal subjects. Now, we're nearing the end of our half hour, and I want to take a moment to hear from our sponsors. And we love our sponsors, and here we go. And thank you to Equinox Learning Hub for our sponsor. Our other sponsor, of course, is Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. And the next one of those will be later today. Um, and, I'm currently broadcasting on my phone, so I accidentally had a little difficulty hitting the commercials, so you got to see one twice. I apologize, but we love our sponsors, and it's better to see it twice than not at all. Sponsorship is very important in media. Um, and hello to Charmed Healer in the chat room. And sponsorship, not only in media, but in our community as a whole, is very important. For many years, we used to do the New Witches Halloween Ball in Chicago. And the thing that made that possible, at least at the level that it took place, and it attracted hundreds of people, but it was in part the sponsorships of the local businesses, the local metaphysical bookstores, made this a much, and the local publications made this a much more feasible and more beneficial event than it could have been otherwise. Our sponsors for this program are helping us to continue to do this. And I think people don't realize how important that can be, because, this is not a free system for us to be using. And it needs to be paid for every month. And I think sometimes people think that the things that come to them in our community all come to them free of charge. And of course, we've all met that person who thinks everything should be free, but they forget that the means that are used to create these things are not free. And I don't have a lot of sympathy for the everything should be free point of view. I don't think everything should be exorbitant, but even the things that appear to be free are not. There's always a cost to them, even if that cost is only time. And that's still an important thing. So I guess that's another little thought to consider in our day of considering thoughts. And I've enjoyed these topics we've talked about today, and I'm going to continue thinking about them because there's a lot there to digest. I hope that you've enjoyed the program and that it's given you some things to think about. And with that, we are at the end of our half hour, so let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love and thanks for all that you have done for us. And we rejoice in this walk we walk together. And at this moment, I have to laugh thinking about what some of the ancestors might have said to some of the comments that we have had today, some of the stories we've had today. And I think it would have given them some pleasure to think on these things, and particularly Lady Bitterwind. But beloved ancestors, beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, we thank you. We ask you to help us to be cognizant of the things that affect us and to find our way through the many challenges of life. And we thank you for all that you do for us. And knowing you are always with us, from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And may you be blessed now and always, and I will see you. I'll see you on Sunday for our Samhain/Beltane ritual here on Corellian TV, and I'll see you back on midday on Monday. And until then, may you blessed be.